8 years ago, I presented to this section a lexicological analysis of the biblical Hebrew noun ish, which then led to this article. Using a structuralist approach, I concluded that in the Bible, the noun ish functions as a referentially relational noun. Its primary sense, I posited, is something like the English noun participant. Among other points, I called attention to a nuance of ish that I called representative. That is, in certain contexts, parties are designated as ish because they stand for their group or another party, representing their interests. Today I am reporting on ways I have developed that argument, particularly in light of my study, meanwhile, of cognitive linguistics. As I begin to build an article for the Semantic Dictionary of Biblical Hebrew about what the word ish means, I wish to characterize how it behaves. And here I should point out that whenever I discuss ish, unless otherwise noted, I am referring also to the nouns anashim, isha, and nashim. This paper demonstrates that ish is a basic level term. It then employs that cognitive linguistic concept to explain certain aspects of how ish is used. In particular, it answers a question first posed to me 9 years ago. Why would this apparently vague term have been used so frequently to denote someone who represents another party when more specific terms were available, such as mלאך? In addition, the hypothesis leads to robust and meaningful results in 3 sample instances that have long puzzled commentators. Given that the term basic level itself was formulated 40 years ago, I am going to assume that this is not the first time that you have encountered it. Nonetheless, I believe that this is the first time that anyone has applied this concept to the word ish. While a handout is being distributed, let me make 2 brief points about methodology. Unlike with most words in biblical Hebrew, the lexicographer's challenge here is to deal effectively with a huge number of instances. In order not to get overwhelmed by the amount of data, I focus on diagnostic cases and widespread patterns. Secondly, the concept of basic level was developed in light of hierarchies of categorization of animals and of artifacts that are mentally organized with graded levels of specificity. However, for making reference to people, a whole array of lexical choices is available, each of which emphasizes a certain attribute. Because many of our labels for human beings are based on different parameters, we should not expect a clear taxonomy. This means that in a given context of use, another term may be preferred to the basic level term, or even that there is more than one basic level term. Consequently, we can expect a basic level term to be widespread in its use compared to alternative labels, but not necessarily predominant in any given topic area. I will now list some of the key qualities and behaviors that are said to characterize a basic level term, which we can use as criteria for assessing whether ish fits this category. 1. It is a short word that is easy to pronounce. 2. When placed in apposition with other substantives, it appears first, and thus is further qualified by the appositive that follows. And 3. It is the unmarked designation in speech. I will now show that ish meets these criteria. Here I am considering ish in all of its uses. I will start with what is most obvious. First of all, ish and isha are indeed short words that are easy to pronounce. One hardly needs to move one's mouth or tongue in order to say them. 2. When placed in apposition with another substantive, ish is indeed the first term mentioned. This claim is a well-known characteristic of our noun. I count 16 instances of apposition with a simple qualifying substantive, rather than a compound expression. In contrast, ish never occurs by itself as a single word qualifier in apposition to another term. As for ascertaining whether ish was an unmarked default designation in speech, we of course do not have verbatim transcripts of how the ancients actually spoke. In the Bible, we have only reported speech within a crafted literary text. But surely, the reported speech mimicked real conversation well enough to have struck the ancient audience as plausible. So, let us sample how ish is used in the speech as reported in the Bible. On occasion, one party verbally points to another party by using the expression ha blank hazeh, where blank is a singular or plural substantive, followed by one of the four proximal demonstrative pronouns. Hazeh, zot, ele, hu. My reason for using a deictic frame as a sample is that such situations are fairly easy to picture, so that I could ascertain with some confidence the speaker's communicative goal, and thus judge whether or not the label's usage was marked. Throughout the Bible, I found 69 instances that, all told, employed 19 different substantives. Of those 69 instances, 25 were marked and 44 were unmarked. As for ish, one could defensively claim that it was used only in unmarked fashion. Furthermore, it comprised 84% of all the unmarked instances. The situational context for all 37 occurrences of ish in proximal deixis was what I called forensic, that is, relatively formal settings that involved legal or contractual proceedings or public debate or open appeals to the deity. One very telling such context is the lawsuit. When biblical disputants state their claim before the judges, they consistently refer to each other not by name, nor by any old term that comes to mind, nor by a pronoun, but rather by using the term ha-ish hazeh or ha-isha hazot. Other contexts show that such usage was considered respectful and dispassionate. In short, ish indeed seems to be the unmarked designation in speech. I have now cited 3 characteristics of ish that qualify it as a basic level term. But where this gets really interesting is how ish is used specifically in the cognitive domain of agency. By agency, I mean an arrangement wherein someone, known as an agent, represents another party. As I will explain in more detail in a related paper tomorrow, underlying any depiction of agency are 2 basic concepts that are culturally conditioned. One basic concept is the very idea that one party can stand in place of another party in a legally binding and or emotionally binding way, such as was presented by all parties depicted in the narrative when Abraham's servant found a wife for Isaac. That idea treats the agent and the principal who designated that agent as to some extent referentially identical. The second basic concept consists of conceptual scripts about agency, standard operational procedures, and their accompanying conversational patterns. Dealing with an agent is qualitatively different than dealing with a non-agent because the agent is actually representing someone else who might well be far away. Consequently, society offers conventional ways of talking about and talking with an agent. Such specific linguistic usages are well attested in the Bible, and they are telltale signs that agency formed a distinctive cognitive domain that was native to the Israelite mind. The domain of agency intersects other cognitive domains. One could model it as a subdomain of those other domains. Or one could say that agency contains a number of subdomains in which one party represents the interests of another party. Warfare, for example, is shown here because soldiers represent their tribe or nation on the battlefield. When they are victorious, the whole populace says, "We won! We!" Hence, this is an agency situation. By household, so that's warfare. And by household, I mean the hierarchically organized corporate household, the Beit Av, Israelite society's fundamental social and economic unit. A householder authoritatively represented both the household as an ongoing corporate enterprise and its subordinate members, such that it was often designated metonymically in terms of its head. Hence, this is an agency situation. With that understanding of the agency domain, let us now consider three signs that would indicate a basic level term specifically in this domain. 1. It would collocate thoroughly with verbs that establish agency. 2. It would collocate with the most agency expressions. And 3. It would display widespread use in various agency contexts. How well does ish collocate with verbs that establish agency? Let us consider the set of verbs that can express or at least imply an agent's authorization, that is, activation. In English, that set would look something like this. Not all of these verbs are equally common. Not all fit equally well into this prototypical construction, I hereby blank you as my agent. And not all are equally appropriate to a particular agency situation. But all of them qualify in certain settings as what I call an agency activation verb. Its use functions to signal a new reality of delegated responsibility and authority. Similarly, in Biblical Hebrew, I count 53 such verbs. Now, of these 53 verbs, how many of them activate an agent who is designated somewhere by the noun ish? 39. That is, the vast majority of the verbs that can express or imply the authorization of an agent are attested in an agency context with ish as their object. And here, object is defined loosely, as in the Dictionary of Classical Hebrew, to include appositives and relative clauses. But what other substantive conceivably has a higher correlation than this? Contrast this bounty of verbs with the corresponding verb collocations of the noun mal'ach, usually glossed as messenger. The Bible uses only 3 different verbs to indicate the activation or task assignment of a mal'ach. Second question. How well does ish collocate with the most agency expressions? By the term agency expression, I mean any rather predictable, recurrent multi-word combination that is fairly idiomatic and is germane to the agency frame. For example, the expression natan biyad X means to consign something to the party designated as X. It is partly idiomatic in that the word yad does not literally mean hand. In this table, the 2 rightmost columns show the 12 agency expressions that I have identified in the biblical corpus. At their left are the top 4 of the 17 substantives that collocated as the object X of those expressions to the right. That is, ish, eved, navi, and mal'ach are the top 4 of the 17 substantives that collocated with those expressions to the right. Out of the total of 67 instances in which these expressions appear, and for which term X is a substantive other than a proper noun, a name, the question is, what is the relative frequency with which ish appears? The answer, although ish is not collocated at all with 4 of those 12 expressions, overall it is still the substantive that is most commonly used, more so than eved, navi, mal'ach, or any other substantive. The third criterion that I will consider is, how widely is ish used in various agency contexts? Assessing this characteristic calls for cataloging all substantives that are used to designate agents within a given agency subdomain and comparing their frequency of use within that subdomain. Here I will sample 3 representative subdomains. I will start with the frame that is probably the most familiar, prophecy. Within the agency, within the agency domain, one subdomain covers human beings outside of the priesthood who speak for God. The existence of this distinctive cognitive frame within the Israelite mind is suggested by the Bible's use of three special designations that appear nowhere else outside of this frame: Navi, Jose, and Ro'eh. Let's call this subdomain prophecy. I found 480 designations within this domain. As you can see, even given those specialty terms, Navi, Jose, and Ro'eh, in this subdomain, Ish holds its own as a designation. It is the second most frequent label after Navi. Next, I looked at all designations for warriors, that is, those persons who represent the folks back home within the context of warfare. Because I am searching for a basic level term, I excluded certain specialty labels that had no chance of qualifying, such as Sar, Na'ar, and Sholef Cherev. What remained were 12 designations, with a total of 242 instances. Of those 12 labels, the relative frequency of occurrence is as shown. After the specialty designation Gibor, which is not very common outside of the warfare subdomain, the most common label is Ish. Where Ish really shines is in the domain of the Beit Av. But first, let us recall that the head of a household was the prototypical member of society. Much of the Bible's legislation is directed by default to the head of household, who had responsibility for and authority over the management of resources for both economic production and consumption. Furthermore, the structure of the whole society was conventionally viewed as a nested hierarchy of households. So, what are the biblical designations for the head of a household? Here are 3 exemplars. I am aware of at least 118 instances in which the Bible designates a householder as such using any substantive at all. The distribution of designations looks like this. Aside from Ish or Isha, the only alternative designation, Baal Habayit or Ba'alat Habayit, appears only 4 times, but only as a supplement to the prior use of Ish, where the context warrants some clarification in the text's participant references. Essentially, Ish has this domain to itself. This point is worth emphasizing because no lexicon that I know of has listed householder as a dictionary sense for Ish. Yet this is the sole term that was used to label the prototypical member of Israelite society. Although I will not make the case now for every cognitive domain or subdomain that involves agency, it turns out that Ish is used to designate an agent pretty much everywhere. After considering the foregoing evidence, and more besides, I conclude that Ish is the basic level term for an agent in Biblical Hebrew. Having identified Ish as a basic level term is helpful in ascertaining its meaning. Before I discuss some specific examples, let me briefly speculate on the word's semantic profile as I understand it so far. Cognitive linguists say that basic level terms are prototypically organized. Bearing in mind that Ish refers to entities that span the entire range of cognitive categorization, from human beings to animals to non-living things to abstract entities, here is how I am currently inclined to view Ish in terms of zones of meaning around a prototype. The diagram for Isha, by the way, would be similar, except that its prototype might be centered more on partner than on householder. The semantic relationship between Ish as participant and Ish as agent can be viewed as cognitively motivated semantic specialization. For an agent is a participant's participant. Cognitively speaking, it would thus be natural to specify an agent as Ha'ish. However, given that the prototype for a basic level term is said to be primary rather than the result of semantic extension, perhaps the sense of participant is the result of semantic generalization from Ish as denoting an agent. What I can say with more confidence is that, as a basic level term, the word Ish matters. Cognitively speaking, basic level categories are said to be the most deeply entrenched. That is, a term such as ish and all that it stands for would have come to mind immediately. Hence, this word's meaning is crucial for understanding how the ancient Hebrew speaker parsed reality. Furthermore, it represents the preferred cognitive perspective as a designation, pinpointing where the focus of human interest lay. In an agency context, the crucial question was, who is representing whom? The use of ish addressed that question by pointing simply to the existence of a salient relationship between agent and principal. This was the optimally informative fact that had to be established. It was the most essential difference between agents and everybody else. In short, ish conveys the largest amount of information about the referent with the least cognitive effort. As a matter of cognitive economy, that is what makes it the default choice for use in agency contexts. Indeed, according to cognitive linguists, one feature of basic level terms is that they serve as the unmarked choice for introducing their referent into the discourse. Let us now look at the contribution of the word ish to the meaning of 3 biblical passages. This is only 3 of dozens of such passages whose meaning is illuminated by consideration of ish as the basic level term for an agent. First, a case of reported speech, Eve's pithy naming announcement in Genesis 4:1 upon the birth of her very first baby. Many interpreters have found this statement challenging because, as Klaus Westermann has put it, the word ish cannot mean the newly born child, and it never occurs with the meaning male child. The situational context is as follows. Humankind has been tasked with a mission, the most recent expression of which was 2 verses earlier, in 3:23. However, humankind was also recently doomed to die. Thus, the significance of Eve's giving birth is that now the parents have an eventual successor to carry on their mission, which will become their descendants' mission, the mission of all humankind. Hence, this is an agency context. Now, in the Bible, concern for a successor or lineal representative is conventionally expressed in terms of ish. In this usage, ish denotes an agent who carries on a mission and a lineage beyond one's own lifetime. But Eve is not resorting to an arcane term, for given that basic level terms serve as the unmarked choice for introducing their referent into the discourse, Eve employs ish here quite naturally, if her purpose is indeed to speak about her son as an agent. Meanwhile, the verb kana, when applied to persons, can mean to engage someone to act on someone's behalf. As such, it is an agency activation verb. Consequently, in its simple sense, Eve's naming statement means, I hereby engage a successor subordinate to the Lord. Compare the gloss supplied roughly 750 years ago by Nachmanides. Ki cha'asher namut yeyeh bimkomenu la'avod et bor'o. For when we die, he will be taking our place to serve his Creator. The second of the 3 passages I will discuss is Exodus 10:7, where, after Moses and Aaron have announced a plague of locusts, Pharaoh's exasperated courtiers say to him, Shalach et anashim, and so forth. The interpretive challenge here can be seen by comparing idiomatic translations. Many moderns construe hanashim broadly as the people. Others read it as the men only, as if the women and children were to stay behind. But in the ancient world, for purposes of communal worship of a deity, it was standard practice to rely upon a duly authorized delegation. It went without saying that such a delegation would consist of leading citizens. This is what Pharaoh's courtiers are now proposing. The Hebrew phrasing employs the article, by the way, because this delegation is definite in the imagination. The verb shilach, to send off, is a classic agency activation verb. The word ish collocates with this verb to denote an agent who has been duly delegated and is being dispatched. Given the present agency context, including an explicit mission statement, the well-entrenched sense of anashim as representatives would be instantly evoked. Again, the courtiers employ ish, naturally, as the unmarked designation for introducing an agent into the discourse. Such a construal is quickly confirmed in the next verse when Pharaoh asks Moses, Vami haholichim, who in particular are the ones to go? As Nachmanides comments here, Pharaoh initially wanted only leaders, elders, and officers to go, anashim who had been designated by name. The final passage to sample is Numbers 33 from the legal genre. Ish ki yidor neder ladonai lo yachel devaro. Meanwhile, Isha appears in the next verse in a parallel formula, V'isha ki tidor neder. This paired pattern is unique in the Pentateuch. The challenge is that our passage's distinctive juxtaposition of Ish and Isha has prompted two schools of interpretation. One, Ish and Isha are mutually exclusive terms, man versus woman. Or two, Ish and Isha refer to whole versus part, where Ish has generic reference and thus includes the referent of Isha, which is a special case. The situational context involves the topic at hand, the authority to pledge as a sacrificial offering a sheep or goat from the stock of wealth in the household where one lives and works. In Israelite society, the ability to vow freely exemplified the autonomous authority that was possessed only by the household's head. The situation posited in verse 3 thus instantly evokes the prototypical Israelite, and thus, for the noun ish, its prototypical sense as a householder. The passage's opposition of ish versus isha is thus framed in terms of householder versus dependents, who are exemplified by daughters and wives. This construal best fits the categories used in the passage's own summary in verse 17. That summary conspicuously does not mention the widow or the divorced woman, who are meanwhile discussed in this passage. Rather, it speaks only in terms of two paired relationships, husband-wife and father-daughter. The prototypical ish is indeed a husband in relation to his wife and a father in relation to his daughter. He is a householder. In short, the text's own categorization turns out to be in terms of householders versus dependents, as would be produced by the basic level automatic construal of ish as householder back in verse 3. In short, I have shined a cognitive-linguistic spotlight on the noun ish, which is so common that we may tend to take it for granted. This noun turns out to be a basic-level term, even or especially in the agency domain, a quality that gives it some interesting characteristics. This noun appears to be the sole designation for the prototypical Israelite, namely the head of the corporate household, and this may even be its own prototype meaning. Furthermore, the noun ish signifies a basic and deeply entrenched conceptual distinction between agent and non-agent. It does this by regarding the referent in terms of that party's established relationship to a principle. That finding explains why this apparently ordinary term has been used so frequently to denote someone who represents another party, even when more specific terms are available. Sometimes those more specific terms are more trouble than they are worth, giving more information than is needed. Which is to say, often it is optimally communicative to simply designate an agent or representative as such, that is, as ish or as isha. And with that, let me thank you for the opportunity to have addressed you.